An abduction in Uganda is an abduction in Kenya, is an abduction in Tanzania. A human rights violation in Tanzania is a human rights violation in Kenya, is a human rights violation in Uganda. Any form of oppression in Kenya, it is oppression in Uganda, and it is oppression in Tanzania.
So if the Inspector General of Police has the responsibility to command the police, he has the responsibility to either command them to commit, to do an act of protecting citizens or to commit the violations. That's why we are holding them accountable.
General MUSEVENI, you took power before I was born. I am now a tax-paying adult. I don't yet have children, but my age mates have children. Bobby Wine was 4 years old when you took power. It's a shame that you've not groomed leaders to succeed you.
I have not read the tweet from MUSEVENI, so I will respond to that question as if it is your question. And human rights groups, lawyers have asked from the beginning, one, that any cases before the military courts be transferred to a civilian court.
When he goes to international capitals, he's asked not only about what is happening in his respective country, but whatever is happening in South Africa, in Sudan, or as far away as Morocco, because we are all Africans.
I have not read the tweet from MUSEVENI, so I will respond to that question as if it is your question. And human rights groups, lawyers have asked from the beginning, one, that any cases before the military courts be transferred to a civilian court, because trial of civilians in military courts for criminal offenses is illegal. And this is something that we have called for. And this is when we do not even know what cases or evidence against Kizza Besigye. That is one. The nature in which Kizza Besigye was taken from, wherever place he was taken from, was not an arrest. Kizza Besigye was abducted, and whatever process that took him and found him in Uganda was rendition. This is an unlawful or a process which does not follow extradition process as per international law. So we calling for his release basically starts from the place of the unlawful nature of his abduction, not arrest, and the unlawful detention. Continuously also, after the Supreme Court decision on 31st January, the military and the state through the prisons have continued holding Dr. Besigye, Obeid Lutale, and Aaron Kizza. That is also unlawful after a decision that has said, one, every person that is being held or who is facing trial or has challenged a court decision against the military court either be freed or their cases be transferred to a civilian court. So that is the reason we are calling for their immediate release and not for a quick trial process. You cannot call for a quick trial process in a process that is already unlawful and a sham process. Thank you very much.
One of the most important things I think that needs to be emphasized in the case of Kizza Besigye and all the political prisoners in Uganda is to first of all explain why it is very important as a region for the East Africa community in particular to shed light on it, but also to ensure that this ordeal ends as soon as it can. One of the outstanding matter that has happened is the fact that the elections coming up, both in Tanzania and Uganda. And it is very clear that this is going to be a year until January 2026 when we will witness a lot of suppression, I would call it, which includes abduction, jailing, even probably killings of political opposition or critics. So there will be an intensified action against it. Now, one of the other important things to keep in mind is 5 years ago, the situation was the same. We saw both in Tanzania and later in Uganda, there was a lot of repression that was happening because of the election. And the safe anchor country was Kenya. And that is very important for both Kenyans, but most importantly, the Kenyan government to understand the situation that it stands in. It is a situation whereby I would like to recall what Mwalimu Nyerere, who most of us will venerate in East Africa as a Pan-Africanist and as a person who was very key in pushing for the integration of East Africa. And this is an important point, particularly I'd like to address to leaders. He said that when he goes to international capitals, he's asked not only about what is happening in his respective country, but whatever is happening in South Africa, in Sudan, or as far away as Morocco, because we are all Africans. That attitude has to be the same when it comes to whatever repression or brutality. I would like to implore for the East Africans and the citizens in particular to understand that we need to unite against such abductions. Because leaders have to understand, to be critical, to be a political opposition member is not a crime. And more importantly, abductions, illegal renditions, and also illegal detention that we are seeing today in Uganda is actually one of the things that creates a stain on all of us. And for that reason, on the part of Tanzanians, on the part of East Africans, it is very important for us to call on the Ugandan leadership to immediately ensure that the rights of Kizza Besigye and all political prisoners are respected and that they're released and they're provided the bail that they're supposed to under the law. But most importantly is to ensure that their human rights is respected. Regardless of whatever personal feelings we may have, personal views, human rights is key. As we always emphasize all the time, utu wetu uko wapi? We have to always respect utu wetu. Asanteni.
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. How confident are we that the President of Uganda will listen? And this is just a beginning, a culmination of solidarity in the region. We are having cross-border repression. We are having transnational repression where we are seeing abductions happening, beyond borders. And these abductions are happening sanctioned or blessed by presidents, blessed by heads of state. And they are taking advantage of the fact that at the ground, we are not as united against them. That is why we have Ugandan voice here, you have Kenyan voice here, you have Tanzanian voice here to continue putting pressure. This is not just the only pressure that we are going to put just addressing the press and other media, but also to take on petitions, to reach out to whoever can be, whether it's through marches to deliver the petitions, to do online petitions, and to do other forms of campaigns so that we have Kizza Besigye and others unlawfully detained released. In Uganda yesterday, there were protests for the release of these friends of ours who are unlawfully detained. This shows that this action is already yielding fire everywhere. Also, we have managed to send trial observation missions or to be part of trial observation missions in these particular cases where we have traveled to Kampala. We have visited Kizza Besigye in prison at Luzira prison. We have visited Aaron Kizza, a fellow lawyer, in the Kitalia prison. And so these are just but efforts that in the long run must yield fruits and will not relent. Thank you very much for that question.
How confident are we? That's a good question. General Museveni's own personal history as a guerrilla is evidence that people power can defeat the gun. First. Two, recent events in Senegal, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Kenya here, is further evidence that gives us confidence that these actions are not in vain. The third and final piece of evidence that gives us confidence is the backlash that we see being meted out on citizens, on lawyers, on journalists, and others engaged in this effort. Facebook has been scrambled in Uganda for more than 5 years now. The same government that scrambled it uses that platform to pass over information and announcements on a platform that is scrambled, because they know what the digital revolution means and what it can deliver in terms of people power. The last question was about cases of abductions in Uganda and whether it is as intense or if not more than the situation in Kenya. First, I would caution us against quantifying abductions and creating a table, because one life is too many. The principle should be that the right to life is indivisible, and that once that is violated, the perpetrators are just as guilty or liable as if it happened to 100, 110 or so people. That said, yes, there has been abductions. The recent count places it at 6,000, and as cases have been resolved in courts, the count has dropped to 3,000. But you have to understand the context, that every election in Uganda is treated as a military operation. So the regime in Kampala has been waging an undeclared war, a low-intensity conflict against young Ugandans, particularly in the central region and elsewhere, but particularly in the central region. So when I mention a count as high as 6,000, it's not misplaced. Rotting away in jails, some bodies have been discovered, thrown away in forests and other such locations. Lastly, what message to Museveni, General Museveni? General Museveni, you took power before I was born. I am now a tax-paying adult. I don't yet have children, but my age mates have children. Bobi Wine was 4 years old when you took power. It's a shame that you've not groomed leaders to succeed you and are instead promoting family rule against the very constitution under whose administration, which was promulgated under your administration. So for me, it's a question of shame and a sense of justice, not just for himself, but also for his family. Thank you.
As my brother Steve read in the statement, we will be marching on 21st of February to present a petition. But more importantly, what we want to communicate is that the first and very important step that we need to take, that we are taking currently, is to bring the people together. We want to bring the communities of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania to speak as one, East Africans. Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki. We want to leave that. An abduction in Uganda is an abduction in Kenya, is an abduction in Tanzania. A human rights violation in Tanzania is a human rights violation in Kenya, is a human rights violation in Uganda. Any form of oppression in Kenya, it is oppression in Uganda, and it is oppression in Tanzania. We are one people. We have to understand that these governments, particularly the heads of states, are working together to silence their critics, with Kenya being the zero ground for abductions in the East African region. So the next steps, we will explore every possible avenue to ensure that the people and communities in East Africa are protected, that human rights are guaranteed, and that the laws that govern these countries are implemented to the letter. So the next steps are very many. We can go to court. We have the international arena. You know, we have local courts. But more importantly, as I said, we want to bring Kenyans, Ugandans, Tanzanians together to speak as one. That is our resolve, and we intend to ensure that we are able to do that in the next coming few days. Thank you.
In responding to your question of whether the Kenyan government is doing enough to protect people who are in Kenya, I think as human rights organizations, we have taken keen observation that the Kenyan government has been on the forefront in enabling human rights violations. And this is not only witnessed by how they have handled persons who have come to this country to seek refuge, but also how they have continued to meet their citizens in Kenya as they try to express themselves, try to agitate for their human rights, and the conduct that the government of Kenya has been handling the situation, the killings, the abductions, the disappearances, all these are violations of human rights. And I think there have been no discrimination of whether you're a Kenyan or an East African or just a foreigner who has sought refuge in Kenya. I think there is a serious problem in Kenya, and as we have mentioned, and we are calling upon the Kenyan government and the Kenyan authority to recognize that they have a duty, a fundamental duty, to protect the Constitution and all the rights which have been envisioned there, provided there. And secondly, we have to keep on reminding the current regime that they need to remember at the end of it all, under the international law, which is part and parcel of the Kenyan law, pursuant to Article 2 of the Kenyan Constitution, they shall be held responsible for their conduct. And these persons, whether it is today or tomorrow, we are 100% sure that they shall be held accountable. We are saying this because we have called for many times the issue of command responsibility, that whenever you give an order or you fail to give an order, either to protect or you give an order to violate, you are held responsible. And we cannot sit and watch. That's why we have been collecting a lot of data. We are collecting data with various organizations, and at the end of it all, persons responsible must be held accountable. Thank you very much. Responsibility principle, it is not necessarily whether you are the one who did it. The question is, who has the responsibility? So if the Inspector General of Police has the responsibility to command the police, he has the responsibility to either command them to commit, to do an act of protecting citizens or to commit the violations. That's why we are holding them accountable. If you disappeared within the confines of the territory of Kenya, then you are under the jurisdiction of this country, and those who have the responsibility from the Inspector General of Police must be held accountable because they have a duty to protect life, whether one or many. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, KMPDU, joined the civil societies across East Africa, that is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, to condemn the detention and the continued holding of Dr. Kizza Besigye in the military jails in Uganda. And we are calling all the health workers, that is in Tanzania, in Uganda, and even in Kenya, and all the citizens, that it's not right to hold or to detain any person who is fighting for the rights. And for this case, somebody who was abducted in Kenya. We are saying that there are professional ethics that take charge of all the health workers. And in this case, it has been reported that his health is also deteriorating. He's also being denied access to health care. Yet he's a healthcare provider, or he has been providing health care for a given time. So as a union of doctors, we are calling all the other unions and we're calling all the other civil societies that we must condemn this in the strongest ways possible. And we must ask also our government, who actually played a strong hand in abductions of Dr. Besigye, to actually speak out and hold the government of Uganda accountable on this. And therefore, we join all the bodies and say that in the demonstration that is scheduled for 21st of February 2025, we will fully participate, and we are asking all the health workers that, yeah, it is only one doctor that is being detained, And this can happen to any professional. We must come out strongly. We are asking Medical Association, we are asking PSK, we are asking Uganda Medical Association, we are asking all the unions and all the bodies that the time to speak is now, and the time to stop all these illegalities is now. Thank you.
So, ni siku 18 baada ya tamko la koti kuu ya Uganda kwamba wale wote ambao wameshtakiwa kwa mahakama ya kijeshi ambao kesi zao zinaendelea ama wameweza kukata rufaa ama kwa njia moja ama nyingine kupinga kesi hizi kuweza kuachiliwa ama kesi zao kupelekwa kwa koti za kawaida ambazo zinahusiana na wananchi. Siku hii tunasema kwamba kesi ambazo zinaendelea za Daktari Kizza Besigye, Haji Obeid Lutale na Aaron Kizza ni kesi ambazo hazifuati sheria kutokana na uamuzi huu, na kwamba watatu hao na wengine wote ambao wanaweza kushikiliwa mahakamani baada ya uamuzi wa koti kuu ni unaenda dhidi ya sheria za Uganda. Leo pia tunaweza kusema kwamba Kizza Besigye ambaye wiki iliyopita alienda kwa aliwacha kula kwa sababu ya kupinga kuendelea kushikiwa katika jela za Uganda, afya yake imedhorora na tunaomba kwamba aweze kupatiwa haki yake na aweze kuachiliwa. Wengine wote ambao wameshikiliwa pia ikifuatia Haji Obeid Lutale na Aaron Kizza pia wanafaa kuachiliwa kutokana na uamuzi wa mahakama. Tukiwa hapa leo, mashirika 10 ambayo yapo hapa nikiyataja: Amnesty International, shirika la Center for Strategic Litigation ambalo lipo Tanzania, Independent Medical Legal Unit, International Commission of Juries Kenya, Kenya Human Rights Commission, Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, Law Society of Kenya, Pan-African Lawyers Union, Change Tanzania Movement na Vocal Africa. Tuko hapa pia kutangaza kwamba kutakuwa na maandamano tarehe 21 Ijumaa hii, maandamano ambayo itakuwa inapeleka maombi yetu kwanza katika bunge letu la Kenya, na pili tutapeleka maombi haya katika jumba la Uganda Embassy ambalo ni la ujumbe wa Uganda hapa nchini Nairobi. Tunawakaribisha Wakenya wote ambao ni wakupenda haki, ambao ni wakupenda amani, kwa sababu ushirikiano huu ni ushirikiano ambao unaletwa na Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki, ambayo inasema kwamba viongozi ambao wameungana kule juu kutukandamiza, viongozi ambao wameungana kule juu kuhakikisha kwamba haki yetu haitiliwi maanani na kwamba utekaji nyara unaendelea nchini, wanafaa wasimamishwe, na hawezi simamishwa na mtu mwingine yoyote kama sio sisi wananchi wa jumuiya kushikana mkono kupinga haki ambazo zinaweza kukandamizwa na kushirikiana kusema kwamba tunakataa haya. Kwa hivyo karibuni tarehe 21. Asante.
A scientific medical analysis of Dr. Besigye's health, which is in serious jeopardy. Citizens who have attempted to protest this have as well been detained, and I should add, violently arrested, as some of you might have seen. So, as I end this opening, I'd like to say that this is a culmination of years of human rights abuses, disregard for the Constitution. The only difference now with this culmination is that it is happening openly, brazenly, and even though the Ugandan Constitution contains provisions on a legislature, an executive, judiciary, that is chapters 6, 7, and 8 respectively. The military remains the primary institution that is riding roughshod over all these processes and institutions. The judiciary is clearly incapable of enforcing its own judgments because of the militarization of just about everything in the country. That's the situation. I'll be happy to take questions, comments, or queries about the same. But first, let my colleagues read the statement. Thank you.
So the statement that is about to be read will be available to you in a few minutes. Let me invite Andrew to skip places with Roland, and Hussein to keep to come closer. And Steve, I think you're in the right place.
I begin. 18 days have passed since the Supreme Court of Uganda ruled on 31st January that the trial of civilians before military courts in criminal cases is unconstitutional and that any such cases must be transferred to ordinary courts. Despite the Supreme Court decision and legal applications for the release of Kizza Besigye, Haj Obeid Lutale, lawyer Aaron Kizza, and others, Ugandan authorities have disregarded court orders and continue to arbitrarily deprive them of their liberty. Kizza Besigye's health has seriously deteriorated after nearly a week on hunger strike to protest his detention.
We, the undersigned organizations, condemn the militarization of justice in Uganda and the escalating government repression ahead of the 2026 general elections. We call on the Ugandan authorities to immediately release Kizza Besigye, Haj Obeid Lutale, Aaron Kizza, and others who are unlawfully detained. The abduction and rendition of Kizza Besigye and Haj Obeid Lutale blatantly violates international human rights law and the principles of extradition treaties. The conviction of lawyer Aaron Kizza by General Court Martial for contempt of courts and sentencing to 9 months imprisonment without a fair trial is brazen targeting of a lawyer in the line of duty. On 16th November 2024, Kizza Besigye and Haj Obeid Lutale were abducted from Nairobi, Kenya, adding to the growing and worrying trends of transnational repression in Kenya, where foreign critics from countries including Ethiopia, South Sudan, Tanzania, Turkey, and Uganda have been abducted in Kenya. The Kenyan government must take action to stop this repression. Further, the Kenyan government must investigate and prosecute those responsible and ensure full reparation to the victims and their families.
Accordingly, we call on the Ugandan authorities to 1. Respect the Supreme Court decision and immediately free Kizza Besigye, Haj Obeid Lutale, lawyer Aaron Kizza, and other unlawfully detained persons. 2. That the Ugandan authority to take immediate action to prevent any grave harm to or loss of life to Kizza Besigye, Haj Obeid Lutale, lawyer Aaron Kizza, and all other persons who have been detained. 3. That the Ugandan authorities to promptly, thoroughly, impartially, effectively, independently, transparently review all cases of civilians on trial in the General Court Martial and immediately cease prosecution of civilians in military courts, and release all individuals found to be arbitrarily deprived of their liberties in Ugandan civilian and military prisons. Number 4 is our call that the Ugandan authority to promptly, thoroughly, impartially, independently, transparently, and effectively investigate death threats against Kizza Besigye by President Yoweri Museveni's son, that is Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is the Chief of Defense Forces of the Ugandan People's Defense Force, and take urgent action to protect his right to life. 5th is our call that the authorities immediately propose amendment to the Ugandan's People Defense Forces Act of 2005 as ordered by the Supreme Court of Uganda to align to its constitutional principles on due process, that is the independence, impartiality, right to appeal, etc., all those rights that falls under the right to due process, and clarifying the limited jurisdiction of military courts under the Constitution of Uganda and international human rights law. It is also our call to the Kenyan authority that they should first acknowledge that abductions and detentions have been committed in Kenya, potentially constituting crimes under international law, and should be promptly, thoroughly, impartially, and transparently investigated, and those suspected of responsibility be prosecuted. Second, that the Kenyan authorities should end the abductions and detentions in Kenya and commit to take effective measures to guarantee non-repetition of these offenses. It is therefore our call that as organization under making these statements, that we do call each and every person and invite every Kenyan and all persons of interest to join us in a march to the Ugandan High Commission in Nairobi and the National Assembly on 21st of February to present a petition for justice for Dr. Kizza Besigye, Haji Obeid Utale, and Wakili Aaron Kizza, and all other persons who have been unlawfully detained by the Ugandan government. Thank you very much.